Hey everyone, my name is Ethan. I'm the Director of Product at Paragon. I'm here joined by Nick, our Product Manager as well. And we're excited to give you a look at some of the new product features that we've released in Q3, give you a little bit of an introduction to those features and how you might use those for your integrations. So as a quick preview, there's a lot of new product work that we've been building to support better developer experience on the platform, as well as to make the platform more extensible in general. So throughout this presentation, you might see ways that we're making it easier to connect your own APIs, your own databases, and extend the feature set of Paragon's platform and integrations to support all of the use cases that you have in mind when building out your integrations. So with that, I'll hand it over to Nick to kick us off with custom webhooks.
Thanks, Ethan. So yeah, the first feature that we worked on and released in Q3 is called custom webhooks. And this is really focusing on extending what your Paragon workflows can be triggered by. So with custom webhooks, essentially on Paragon, you can create webhook listeners against any HTTP webhook API out there to trigger both the native integrations that are supported by Paragon, but even those that are custom, that you've custom built on Paragon. So with this, we expose a custom webhooks wizard within the workflow editor, allowing you to describe how to create these webhooks on behalf of your users. So we can kind of quickly jump right into it and show you how you can implement this for your Paragon workflows. Great, so now we're in the Paragon dashboard, and I can show you what this new feature looks like. So in your Paragon workflow editor, we're here in a Monday.com integration. You can see a list of triggers that we have already natively supported in Paragon. So there are some things like whenever an item is created or updated in Monday.com, we want to trigger a new Paragon workflow. Now, we've also exposed this new custom webhook tab, which when clicking into it, exposes a wizard to create the webhook. So here, the Paragon developer will go through a few steps to essentially tell Paragon how this webhook is created. So across the different webhook APIs, these webhooks can either be created programmatically via an API endpoint or manually from a user within Monday.com or their integrations application. So here you would go through the entire wizard flow to be able to set up this webhook. And back inside of your workflow, you're able to start these workflows from these custom events that you've subscribed to. So here's an example of me creating a new board item. So whenever a Monday.com, a new item is added to a board, I can trigger my workflow. So this is just one example of the many, many different custom events within Monday.com, as well as all of the integrations across the Paragon catalog that you can now trigger your events from. So no longer are you bound kind of by only the native events that Paragon supported. You can now subscribe to any of these and trigger your Paragon workflows from any of these events. So we're really excited to roll this feature out and get in touch with our team to enable this for your instance.
All right. Thanks, Nick, for that overview of custom webhooks. I'll continue with talking about resources, which is another feature that we're adding to make it easier for you to plug in your existing API service, define it once in your Paragon project, and then reuse that configuration as requests and triggers across any workflow in your account. So to jump into what this feature looks like, when you set up a resource or an API resource within your Paragon project, what will happen is you will be able to add it as a trigger or a workflow action to your integrations. So we support all authentication methods, meaning that whether your API authenticates over OAuth with API keys or with something custom, we'll be able to support whatever authentication that your API will need. We'll be able to use that authentication to send requests to your API, which you can then pull into any workflow and add as its own step. And you can also define event types based on webhooks that you have available in your API and reuse those as triggers for different workflows. So let's go ahead and jump into a demo. In your Paragon project, you'll see that a new page will appear called resources. And to start creating a resource, you'll click create resource to define your API. So in this case, I'm going to call this the TaskLab API, and we're taken to a setup configuration screen, which asks us to essentially define how this API authenticates. In this case, I'm going to go through an example of if each of your users has an API key that's associated with their account, this is how we would configure that type of API. So let's say for each user that I have, we're going to define an API key that they'll use to authenticate. I'm just going to use a placeholder URL here. And we'll set the token to be the API key. And again, this is kind of where I'm defining the reusable part of the API authentication. Once I define it here, it will be that same configuration will be reused across all requests that are related to this resource. Next, and finally, you'll see that an example of how you actually connect a user's API key for TaskLab in your application. So in order to tell Paragon which users have which API keys, you'll call this new SDK function, which also has a REST API counterpart. And you'll essentially tell us for this user what their API key is. This API key will get saved alongside the other encrypted credentials that they have stored for each integration they have connected. But in this case, we're actually storing a connection back to the TaskLab API, which would represent your own API. After that, I can send a test request using the configuration that I've defined in the previous steps. Make sure that that looks right. And once we are able to successfully test a request, we can go ahead and click Finish. So it's quite easy to define what a resource looks like, and you can use that same process to define all types of APIs, like ones that target OAuth authorization types or OAuth client credential authorization types. You can define them both at the user level, where each user has their own set of credentials, or at the app level, meaning that your whole app will use one set of credentials to authenticate to the API. But after you have that configured, you'll be able to use this resource in other workflows. So one way that you can do that is you can click Create Trigger for this TaskLab API, and you'll be able to start defining webhook events for the TaskLab API resource with the same wizard that Nick just demonstrated with our integrations. So in addition to defining custom webhooks for any integration in our catalog, you'll also be able to define them against your own API using resources. Additionally, if I hop into one of the other integrations I have in my account, so in this case, I'll go to Asana, I'm going to create a new workflow. And let's say we have a scheduler type workflow that I'm going to start using here. What you'll notice is that we now have the TaskLab API step available as an option for my workflows. And once I select this step type, you'll notice that the base URL is pre-filled, so I won't have to type that. I can type in a relative path to my own API. And all of the authorization settings are built into this step. So all the authorization settings that we defined in the configuration screen will be reused for this step. So now I don't have to go around redefining every time what my API authorization looks like. I can simply reuse it with the TaskLab API request step. So that is an overview of resources. Again, after setting up this configuration, you'll be able to use it as both reusable requests and triggers in your workflows. It's currently in private beta access, and so if you're interested in defining your own API inside of your Paragon project, getting set up with those workflows, please reach out. The documentation is available publicly, and there you'll also find a way to sign up for the private beta. All right. Moving forward and to talk about Paragraph, we've made a number of Paragraph updates. And so I'd like to first just start by talking about Paragraph if you haven't heard of it already. Paragraph is Paragon's integrations as code framework. So what that means is what I just showed you in the dashboard was the visual editor, where you can, of course, use visual workflows to define your integration logic and to configure all of your integrations within an easy-to-use visual dashboard. But what you may not know is that all of those settings, configurations, and workflow options are also available in a code-based representation using a framework that we built called Paragraph. With Paragraph, you're able to define all of that configuration as code. Once it is represented as code, you're able to commit it to a version-controlled repository. So, for example, if your team uses GitHub for code review and version management, you can basically use GitHub as the source of truth for the integration logic that you deploy to the Paragon platform. So we support a two-way sync between your GitHub repository and the Paragon dashboard, so you can continue to use the visual dashboard in many ways alongside the integrations as code framework. So there's a lot that you can do and open up and incorporate into your engineering process. So if you aren't taking advantage of Paragraph already, or if you're interested, please take a look in our documentation and reach out to our team. To talk about the feature updates we've made, on the DX side, we've built a new interactive push command for the Paragraph CLI. So the Paragraph CLI includes this command, which allows you to basically take the code-based representation that you have locally and deploy it all, push all of the updates into your Paragon dashboard. But now, as a part of that push command, we'll also show you a changelog of the effects that will happen when you run parrot push. So this is basically to help visualize what kind of changes you're making and sending to the remote location, which in this case is the dashboard. And also, you'll be able to address any deploy warnings that you'll need to address before pushing. So for example, if you happen to be missing an environment secret that wasn't defined in your project, but you've referenced it in a workflow in code, we'll warn about that before you push so that you can resolve it before you end up deploying. Also in beta is a new feature for the CLI, which allows you to automatically deploy all workflows that get pushed as a part of the push command. So what that means is after you run parrot push, all of the changes will be available in your development environment for immediate testing. There won't be this second step you'll need to do to go to the dashboard and then set or mark workflows as active or deployed to start testing. So hopefully that closes the feedback loop and makes that a little bit tighter so that you can continue to push from your Paragraph projects and then immediately start seeing the results of that in your development environment. Awesome. Finally, I wanted to talk about rate limits. So of course, Paragon is responsible for managing all of the integration logic that you are defining and writing against third-party services. And part of the nature of working with third-party services is that there's going to be a number of errors and usage expectations that are frankly quite difficult to work with. We've seen rate limit errors from all different types of services being enforced at different levels, from per endpoint specific rate limits to per account rate limits. Rate limits are handled differently depending on if you request them as an app or as a user. There's all of these cases that you'll run up against when you develop integrations and you're working with third-party APIs. So Paragon has had a solution to this in the sense of we have all of our steps are able to automatically retry from these types of transient errors and kind of keep the workflow execution going even after we encounter these types of errors. But we wanted to take it a step further by actually incorporating some of that known rate limiting logic for each of our catalog integrations into each request step, each outbound request that we make from the platform, and of course, all of the native integration actions that you'll use as a part of developing your integration. So what does that look like? What this means is that Paragon is now tracking all of the requests that you're making against the third-party API. And if we recognize that we are about to exceed the rate limit of the third-party API, or we are observing a 429 status code, which would indicate that we've already exceeded that limit, our system will automatically back off for the appropriate amount of time as reported by the integration or as known by the integration's config. So for example, if we know that we should never exceed a 100 requests per minute limit for a particular integration, and we observe that we are approaching that limit, our system will automatically back off and know that we can resume in the next minute for the next window of time that requests become available. So what this looks like is that our team goes into each integration in our catalog and essentially defines the configuration for how rate limits and rate limit information is reported on a per integration basis. So our team is working to expand catalog support for this feature across different integrations. Currently, we support Salesforce, NetSuite, and Gmail, with many more coming in the near future. And for those integrations today, once you start using any of our integration actions or requests, all of the requests that are sent from those integrations will have this guarantee that we will respect the rate limits of the platform. And even when we encounter unexpected rate limiting errors, your workflows will continue as expected. So there's no work needed actually to opt into smart rate limits. That configuration is applied automatically for the integrations that are supported. And so this is just another way that the Paragon platform really helps you manage your request usage and all of the different complexities of different integration-specific situations that are quite difficult to manage as you scale up your integration support. So we're really excited about smart rate limits. I think it takes advantage of our platform in many ways, and excited to roll this out to the rest of our integrations catalog. All right, I think we're now going to jump into a little Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them into the chat. I think we have some that have come in already, so we can maybe start there. First question we have is custom webhooks supported in custom integrations as well? Nick, you want to take that one?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, custom webhooks as a feature is supported both for the native integrations in the catalog as well as those custom integrations that you may have built. So we're really excited to build this support across all of our catalog as well as your custom integration catalog as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Next one is, do triggers for resources replace app events? Yeah, this is a great question. So for those of you who might not be aware, we support app events today, which allow you to send data through and trigger workflows that way. And app events can be used to trigger workflows across multiple integrations. So it mechanically works very similarly to the resource triggers that I showed you today. Those triggers are not intended to replace app events, but it definitely makes it easier to integrate for customers that might already have a Webhooks API that is available. So one kind of common request that we've gotten around app events is that app events requires you to implement a Paragon user token signing logic and pass that through in the headers of the request that actually sends that app event trigger. So we wanted to simplify that for customers who might already have that webhook system available, allow them to plug that directly in and start using Paragon workflows. So yeah, in summary, not intended to replace, but is an easier implementation option for those of you who already have webhooks. Cool. Next up here, just to confirm, we can use both the visual editor and the code framework, or do we have to pick one? So with the visual editor, yeah. So this question is about Paragraph. And yeah, this is a good question. You don't have to opt into one specific direction if you opt into Paragraph. Because Paragraph supports two-way sync, you're actually able to continue maintaining and creating editing workflows in the visual editor while pulling down those changes in the code framework. And vice versa, if you maintain and add workflows and integrations in the code framework, you can push them back up to the platform and there will be a visual representation. So there's sort of this bidirectional relationship between all the code-based representations in Paragraph and the workflows that we have available in the visual editor. So you don't have to opt into one. However, we do see, some teams opt into one. It's sort of up to your preference as far as what works best for your development workflow. And if it matters that the source of truth be the visual editor or the code framework, that's really a matter of preference. So we've seen both, to be clear. Yeah, both are definitely supported. Okay, and here's one. With the interactive push commands, would we still promote projects to staging via the dashboard? Yeah, so this is a question about the new push command from the Paragraph CLI, and I guess its relationship to releases, where we have the ability to promote projects from development to staging via a new release? So the answer to this is yes. The push command is really intended to write over a Paragon project in general. So you can kind of think of a push, a para push, very much like a Git push, in the sense of once you push those contents, they will start deploying into whatever environment you started that you pushed into. And the difference between a push and a release really is in the kind of the historical treatment of it. So a release is intended to be an artifact in your account, which essentially says at this version, at version 1.0 or version 1.1, here are the changes that were made. And here is a list of deployment warnings that you should address before moving this into staging or into production. So there are staging and production specific considerations that are taken into account with releases that may not be taken into account with the push command. And in addition to that, releases also lets you keep those historical artifacts of how those changes were made over time. Whereas the push command is really more to just write it into the Paragon platform if it exists in code and hasn't yet synced up to the visual dashboard. So yeah, the answer to that is yes, you will still use releases alongside the push command. They're slightly different parts of the workflow, but of course, we're always evaluating ways that we can bring more of the workflow that is available in the dashboard into the Paragraph CLI. So that's yeah, that's something that we'll definitely be taking a closer look at in the near future. And we know that that is a request we get as well. So thank you for that question. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions for now, but of course, you're always more than welcome to reach out to our team. We'll be available over Slack or email, any ways that you have feedback for the platform or in general about these features. Happy to hear them. So thank you all for your time today. Again, really appreciate it. And yeah, please be in touch if you have any comments or feedback.